I'm Brian Schmidt. I'm a composer, sound designer, and music technologist in the game industry. So kind of ranges the gamut from designing sound systems to writing music to run on those sound systems. Well, the first video game I did was a game called Narc, which was an arcade game done by Williams. At the time, it was super high-res graphics, which if you look at it now is, kind of laughable. It was one of the first times in the video game they actually used digitized images, so they would actually, go into a visual studio and photograph people and film people. There was no motion capture or anything like that, but the face was a human face, and it was just a sprite that kind of moved around, but it was still based upon real digital images. The music system for that was still FM based. And again, that was just a very, very fun game to work on. And one of the fun parts for me about that was when I had left Williams, I actually had a sort of going away party at my house, and Eugene Jarvis, one of the main designers of the game, walks in with this CD. Turns out that the Pixies decided to cover the theme from that game that I wrote, and he walked in with a CD, so I didn't even know they were doing it. So that was kind of fun. Yeah. It's they released it on a couple of their albums as Planet of Sound and the complete B-sides, since it was, I think, the B-side of Planet of Sound. And actually, a snowboarding video used the Pixies version in one of their snowboarding sequences. That was like in the last couple of years, so that was pretty fun. But actually, the first console video game I did was actually a video pinball, which I got because of my expertise in pinball machines, a game called Crew Ball, which was a Motley Crue license. It was mostly original music on that. We licensed one Motley Crue song, but the rest was all original. And again, then that was for EA, and so I got into the EA kind of crowd. And so I did a bunch, again, I did Madden for quite a while. I did Mutant League Football, that series. I did Desert Strike in the Desert Strike series. So it was a pretty fun time. This is in the Genesis, Super Nintendo days. And then when PlayStation, Saturn came out, I did some games for them. I got the first Madden for PlayStation, I think was Madden 97, I did that. And then Microsoft called, and I figured that was it for games for a little while. Yeah, the first time I heard about Xbox, it was a PowerPoint presentation that the founders of the Xbox, Kevin Backus and Seamus Blakely, showed me in a bar in London. And they knew I had done a lot of work in console games, and so they were like, "Hey, we think maybe Microsoft should do this game console, but what do you think?" So I was very excited by that. I was at Windows at the time on Direct Sound and Direct Music, but I saw that, and it's like, wow, I got to be part of that. So that was a lot of fun. It was very quick. It was very intense. From Bill and Steve giving the green light for Xbox to hitting the store shelves was only 18 months. So during that time, there was, from the audio perspective, what are the sound system capabilities? What does it need to do? What chips are we going to use? We were evaluating different chip vendors. So that was a very exciting time. So we definitely wanted to make a statement with Xbox that audio is a very important piece of video gaming technology. And semi-serendipitously, based on a presentation I had given at WinHEC, the Windows Hardware Engineering Conference, about what DirectX 8 audio was going to look like, a company called NVIDIA started making a chip roughly based on that architecture. And so they were able to come in and say, hey, we have this chip that's mostly done, that does all this really cool stuff. You know, how does this look? And so they were obviously a very, very strong contender, because that was very much in line with the things that we were doing. We did add a couple of other very cool pieces of technology that once we realized we could sort of make some customizations specifically for Xbox on this, we added a whole extra little DSP section just to do Dolby, which hadn't been done before. That was a brand new technology. And we made some other changes in terms of data compression and things like that to make it more applicable to a console. But between the fact that Xbox had a hard drive and we stuck this, really quite powerful sound chip on it. Essentially, it was Pro Tools on a chip back in 2001. So we were pretty excited to ship that out. At the time, Bungie had just been bought by Microsoft to bring Halo to the platform. And by the way, nobody thought Halo was going to become Halo. Halo was just this other game to be part of our launch portfolio. We didn't know at the time it would be Halo. And Marty O'Donnell, the audio director at Bungie, composer for Bungie, had this very high-end notion of what he wanted to do, and he had heard that we were looking at trying to get surround sound in games. It wasn't clear it was technically possible, but that was something he very much pushed for. So definitely from first-party titles wanting to use the technology, to us also wanting to have a big strategic differentiator from PlayStation. PlayStation 2 had been on the market for a period of time already, and so it was what can we do to really kind of up the bar and beat them on that front. We were really psyched about that. That's great. Dolby at Xbox actually probably started at a game developer conference in Long Beach in '98. I was having lunch with, this was before Xbox existed. I was having lunch with somebody at Dolby, Bob Brummer. We were talking about I was thinking about surround sound in Windows, because I was newly at Microsoft and I was thinking about Windows. And we got into this talk about latency and Dolby Digital, and it was kind of one of those dinners where at the beginning one of those lunches where at the beginning of the lunch we were like, there's no way this can really happen, to by the end of the lunch with a bunch of napkin sketches sort of, this might actually work. And that became kind of the genesis of what later would be known as Dolby Digital Live, which was the real-time encoder version of Dolby Surround, or Dolby Digital 5.1, specifically for games and real-time interactive applications. And as I mentioned before, we, in working with NVIDIA and Dolby, figured out what kind of processor we would need to be able to do that. Dolby figured out what kind of magical tweaks they would need to make to Dolby to make it be able to run in real time. And it was a lot of technical challenges going on. There was also a lot of business challenges. When you have two big companies like Dolby and Microsoft kind of sitting there and at each other, it went down to the wire. Literally, it was midnight before Xbox production starts. There was a business development person at Microsoft, Barry, who was just, this went on for about a year. We knew we could make it work technically. Can we make it work, get a good deal going? And it was midnight the night before production starts, and we get a call from the VP in Mexico, and they're like, we've got 2 molds of the Xbox casing. One of them has the Dolby logo on it, one of them doesn't. We need to know in 8 hours which one we start making. And that was the night where finally over the phone we actually hammered out the last of the details with Dolby, and then they FedExed the contract, and the next day there was an all-hands meeting, and I had the pleasure of being able to sign as the witness to the contract in front of the team at the all-hands. So that was a lot of fun. So for the boot sound for the Xbox, we had a problem. The boot sound is there, or the boot sequence is there to show you this entertaining visual image with the Xbox brand on it, and it also plays a sound. And what that really does is it covers up the time it takes, the 7 or 8 seconds it takes for the Xbox to boot itself up and get going. So rather than just sitting there black for 7 seconds, it does something. So they created this animation. The problem is that this all had to live in a ROM chip with only, I believe, a couple hundred kilobytes total. And after all the Xbox kernel and boot code and graphic sequences, there was only about 25 kilobytes left. And so I had to make a sound that lasts for 8 seconds, but only took 25 kilobytes. So using a pre-recorded WAV file was out of the question, and you couldn't even use MP3 for something like that. So I actually went back to the old pinball machine toolbox and, how do I synthesize a sound using only 25 kilobytes of memory? So I essentially wrote a very small version of a sound operating system that I had written for pinball machines and console games, and I used it to drive the Xbox chip that was in there. I have some white noise that I filter in real time, and some sine waves and sawtooth waves that I can filter and open up the filter and close it down again for that sort of wow sound. That's a single cycle sawtooth wave filtered in real time. So I wrote this little sequence that matched the visuals, and that became the boot sound. So 3D sound card wars. This was before I was at Microsoft. Microsoft had released a technology called DirectX, which obviously is still around today. And they released a technology called Direct Sound 3D with DirectX 3. And that was, for the first time on Windows, an API, a set of programming interfaces that lets a game developer specify not just, play a sound at this volume in this pan left and right, but be able to specify, here's the XY position of the sound, here's the XY position of the listener, here's where the listener is looking, and essentially in 3D dimensional space, allow for the placement of sounds. And there was a bit of a controversy because when, at the time, Microsoft did not open up that architecture to people. So they had a specific 3D audio algorithm that they were going to use and essentially not allow other algorithms to be licensed. In the meantime, you have companies like Creative Labs. Oriole Semiconductor, a company called Sensora, ESS, a company called Q-Sound, all with these different 3D audio algorithms, and they all wanted to be able to have their sound cards use this algorithm, accelerate this API. And so they actually all got together through the IASIG, the Interactive Audio Special Interest Group, and kind of presented a unified front to Microsoft and kind of said, well, if you're not going to let us do it, we're going to find a way to work around it and accelerate it anyway. And Microsoft eventually relented, and starting with DirectX 5, any sound card could accelerate the 3D audio algorithm so that games could do surround sound, and some of them did HRTF processing, some of them did multi-speaker, but it was a very vibrant time for a little while there in sound cards. Again, lots of different players. There was a bit of consolidation that happened and some lawsuits back and forth and some buying of companies and things like that. But certainly in the late 90s, there was a lot of action in the sound card market. Right. So Game Sound Con, simply put, is the conference on music and sound design for video games. I started in 2009. When I was at Microsoft, especially on early on in the Xbox program, I saw a lot of game titles come through. We'd get good looks at them. And one thing that happened around the time of PlayStation 2 or the original Xbox, because of the changing nature of the technology and DVD format, suddenly you could just go into a studio and record game music. It wasn't as specialized production skill as it was previously. And so we started seeing a lot of people come in from television or film or high quality home studios and get into games. And it turns out that it's not quite that simple. There's still lots of unique things about game audio, game music, that are very different than doing music for linear media. And I'd see the same problems. Composers and sound designers trip over these same issues as they were coming from linear media into games. So after leaving Microsoft, it occurred to me, hey, I bet there's a kind of a need here to educate people who are well versed in media creation for more traditional media and would like to get into games, but how can we help them not trip over these same issues that I was seeing people trip over? Technical constraints and memory and all, some of the creative differences, and how do you put sound to a game that's different than putting sound to a linear picture. So I originally created Game Sound Con for sort of that market, where it's sort of a Game Audio 101 cram course over 2 days. And then as Game Sound Con expanded, we ended up adding some additional tracks for not only the people who are new to games, but people who are very well versed in games, and so that people from Bungie or from Activision or from PopCap can go and share sort of what are they doing on the real cutting edge of games, and getting all those people together. And then also being able to add some hands-on training component, where I have the people from FMod Studio and from Audio Kinetic Wise coming in, and bring your laptop and let's walk you through the process of creating interactive audio for games, from fairly high-level conceptual to really, really down and deep for people who are very experienced in it already, but just want to learn the tools a little bit better.
Great.
So it's been fun seeing that grow. I think the very first Game Sound Con, we were about 45 people, and last year in LA we were pushing 3,000 or 300. So let me say that again, so I don't. So the very first Game Sound Con was around 40 to 45 people, including Nile Rodgers was one of our speakers back then, actually. And last year we were pushing 300, so it's been fun to see it grow over the years and become sort of one of the major conferences in the industry. It used to be that as a composer for games or sound designer for games, there was sort of this, I'm going to do a big Xbox game or a big PC game or a big PlayStation game. And then in 2008, 2009, two big things really happened that totally changed the nature of game audio, or the game industry and game audio as a result. And that was the App Store and Facebook. There was actually an article in USA Today about in 2013, what are the 10 fastest growing job categories in the US? And the first one was petroleum engineer, and the second one was also oil and gas related, and the third was composer and music director. And I was like, whoa, how did that happen? The article said, could be that there's more films being made or something like that. Well, it turns out there aren't more films being made. So I went into the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, where they got their data from, and drilled down a little bit more. And it turns out there is an exact correlation between the increase in the number of composer jobs and when the App Store and Facebook opened up. And so essentially what happened is the creation of social gaming and the need for composers and sound designers for casual and mobile and tablet and Facebook games just followed this exponential curve. Suddenly there was, tens of thousands of more games being made. So of course there's more need for composers and sound designers, enough so that it made USA Today. So I think that's very important for people who are looking to get into games, is to realize that there's a very, very broad spectrum of games, and that there's a lot of work in this sort of casual space. And these aren't necessarily college student eat tuna fish games. They're professional games that are simply for smaller platforms, and they don't take, they're not $70 million budget 3-year games. They're $3 million budget, 10-month games.
Yeah, and there's no reason. I mean, they're moving into full orchestras for this stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are still some memory challenges you don't have. It's a little bit reminiscent of the older days in that, I'm working on a game that's being published by Nexon right now, and trying to fit thing into a fairly small memory budget, but still get that orchestral sound, but have the interactivity using things like Wise or Fmod for that. But again, it's a genre of game, and it's kind of like doing jingles, right? They're smaller projects, they're not cheap budget projects, and it just has meant there's been a whole lot of work. I heard the other day that 750 games per day are being put on the App Store. And a lot of these are fairly decent budget. So audio game, as it sort of sounds, is a game where the main gameplay mechanic is based on sound instead of visuals. So kind of for fun, a couple of years ago, I decided to try my hand at making one from scratch, doing the whole thing. So I've been into 3D audio for a long time, so I was trying to figure out how can I use 3D audio as a gameplay mechanic, for a quick casual game. And I ended up deciding to do something like whack-a-mole, except with sound. So the idea is that it's an iPhone or tablet game, you have sound and you'll hear a sound, somewhere around you, and you tap on the screen, an equivalent place mapping where that sound comes from. So you hear a little brrr, and you tap in the right place, you hear a brrr, and so on. So again, whack-a-mole, but with audio. And it was actually very enlightening. I hadn't tried to make audio such a gameplay mechanic before. And one thing you learn is that we're actually not really that good at hearing, especially localizing sounds. Hearing is really designed to work in conjunction with our visual sense. And so simply having a sound play at a specific place in 3D space, it can be very, very difficult. And so my game was stupidly hard. And so I ended up having to go through and kind of refactor how the gameplay mechanic worked to make it much easier. Eventually, if you play the game long enough, it gets back to where it really was. It gets fiendishly difficult. But so I added in some visual hints, and then those eventually go away. And again, things gradually get harder. You have to be more and more accurate with your things. But it was a lot of fun. Again, just to be able to bring a game from sort of conception, code it up, do the sound, put the 3D sound engine in, and then release to the App Store was kind of fun. And I discovered this really wonderful community of visually impaired gamers. And some of these people are amazing. They'll play a game like Mortal Kombat and beat most sighted players purely by knowing the sound of the game really, really well. And it gave me an appreciation of overall game sound design as to how important nuance is in game sound in general, that a well-designed, a well-sound designed game can be played by somebody without sight, even though the game was not designed to be played just by sound alone. So that was a lot of fun. Oh, the next big thing for game audio, that's always a scary prognostication. One thing we've started to see already, and I think some of it is that a lot of the barriers to really great game audio a while ago kind of stopped being CPU related or technology related. We don't need faster processors or things like that. The real bottleneck was in tools that let creative people, composers and sound designers, take advantage of what capabilities there were, right? Prior to things like Wise or Fmod or Fabric or Gigantic or some of these audio tools, interesting game audio techniques and concepts had to be hand-coded in. That was fine when it was Chris Granner and me and Dave Thiel writing assembly language, but that doesn't scale very well. And so the growth of these and the emergence of these tools, Xact was one of the earliest ones that we did for the Xbox. So I think you're going to start to see an even more better refinement of these workflows. Again, it's not about being able to do things, it's about being able to do things in a pipeline, in a context, in a workflow that lets you really iterate and be creative and try lots of different things out. So you can try and fail and try and fail and try and fail multiple times in a session, as opposed to having to spend a lot of overhead doing that. Simultaneously, there are a couple of fun things that are coming around again. 3D audio was kind of quiet for quite a long time, a decade and a half by my watch, or 2 decades. And so augmented reality, virtual reality is really seeing a renaissance of 3D audio technologies. And so I think the kinds of work that's going to go into providing simulated systems and things like that are definitely up and coming. And then a final thing I think is it may be the time where the kinds of hybridization of pre-recorded music with the kind of synthesized music, the synthesis technologies have gotten a lot better. You know, you could envision games where the equivalent of an entire Cinesamples library is at the fingertips of a game composer, and with some combination of pre-recorded and these extraordinarily high-quality virtual things that we can get back to the best of both worlds. That super interactivity we could have back in the old noteless days, but combined with incredibly high production values that we have for live orchestras and live musicians and super high quality synthesis. So it's kind of where I'd like to see things go.